Allora, abbiamo visto un meccanismo molto potente e
We have just seen a very simple yet powerful
cioè
mechanism,
splittando una
that is, by
galassia,
splitting a
questa
magnet
si
into
divide
two
a sua
parts,
volta.
each part in
Se io
turn
voglio
splits into two
rinforzare
poles.
un
If I
polo
want to
nel
boost one of the
movimento
two poles,
un polo
north or
qualsiasi di
south,
una calamita,
it can be done
posso
only by
farlo
reinforcing the
rinforzando
other pole
anche
as well.
l'altro polo e
I
non
can't
posso
get a
fare un
monopole.
monopolo di una
This
calamita.
physics-based
Questo
process tells
processo è
us
il
something
processo
about
che Davide
duality and
spiega quando
shows us
parla
that
di
being
dualità
against or for
e ci fa
something
vedere che
means
essere
to
contro
strengthen the
qualcosa o
opposite side as
qualcos'altro
well. That is,
rinforza
it
entrambe le
strengthens
cose,
both sides,
portando l'energia
bringing
d'insieme
divisive energy into the
traducendo
world
le guerre,
from which
le
wars,
tensioni e
tensions
la
and suffering
sofferenza.
come.
Voglio parlare
Now I
di
want to
diciamo un
digress briefly into
attimo,
physics,
aprendo una
even
parentesi
if it could
fisica,
seem that we are
che
diverging
sembra
from
un
what
po'
we were
scollato da quello
saying.
che stiamo
The
dicendo,
topic will be
perché ci
needed later,
serviranno
and
nei
my
prossimi
intent is
incontri
also
di
to bring
interpretare
back to our
un po' della
meetings the
meravigliosa
wondrous
filosofia
laws
dei
of
fisici,
physics.
di un processo opposto
I want to
che
expand now
credo
on the
prenderà
process of
molta
nuclear
importanza nei
fusion, which
prossimi
I
anni,
believe will become
ed è
very
la fusione
important in the
nucleare.
coming years.
Perché
And why
dico
do I
nucleare,
want to
fusione
expand on
nucleare?
it? Because
Perché la fusione
fusion is the
nucleare è un
opposite
processo
process to
opposto.
division. In
Tra
fact,
due
in nuclear
particelle
fusion,
divise
from two
si
divided
crea una
particles a
fusione
fusion is
e
created.
quella fusione
Such
dà
fusion
energia.
releases energy.
Questo
This very
stesso
aspect makes me
aspetto
feel
della
that it is
fusione
something representative
mi
of
fa
the new
sentire che è
consciousness.
qualcosa tipico
It
della
is
nuova
exactly the
coscienza.
opposite action to
È
splitting a
esattamente
magnet.
l'opposto di spezzare una calamita. Lì dove
Wherever by breaking I
spezzandolo
create
creo la
duality,
dualità,
here the duality is
invece la dualità
transcendent.
viene
At
trascinata.
first we talked about an aspect of the
E se abbiamo
magnet
parlato
related
di
to
magneti in
classical
un certo
physics.
senso, diciamo di
Now we will
fisica
talk about
classica,
the engineering
ora ne
aspect of the
parleremo di
magnets,
magneti, che è
related
l'aspetto
to the
di
engineering
teoria
of nuclear
della fisica
reactors in the
nucleare,
first
quindi degli
researches of
studi della
nuclear
fusione
fusion.
nucleare,
I'm
fusione
talking about
nucleare,
nuclear fusion,
dove
not
anche
fission.
l'aspetto appunto ingegneristico dei magneti, e cioè servono, cioè che vedere un attimo i primi studi di... Ok, vedete, quello viene chiamato toro.
Inside that pink zone,
Lì
a
dentro
plasma
quella
will
zona rosa
circulate, which must have
circolerà
an
un
extremely
plasma.
high temperature,
Questo
that
plasma
is
deve avere una
millions of
temperatura
degrees,
talmente
in one
alta,
case
milioni di
billions of
gradi,
degrees.
e in un caso 1 miliardo di gradi, sapete, infinitamente
Such a
più alta della
temperature is
temperatura del
infinitely
Sole.
higher than the
E
sun's.
questo plasma è talmente
It is
a
so high
temperatura
that the
elevata che non
plasma
può
cannot
toccare
touch
nulla.
anything.
Come
So,
gli si
how would it
permetterà di
run in a fusion
girare
reactor?
in un reattore a fusione?
With the
Con una
magnetic
limitazione magnetica.
levitation. The
Questi
magnets will
magneti
need a
per essere
temperature
potenti
close
hanno
to
bisogno di una
absolute
temperatura
zero,
massima allo
which is
zero
at
assoluto, che
least
è meno
minus
273 gradi.
273 degrees
Quindi noi,
Celsius.
per accedere a
It
questa
means that in order
tecnologia,
to access this
probabilmente sarà la
technology,
tecnologia del
which
futuro a
will probably
prescindere dalle
be
sue
the technology
politiche e
of the
idee
future,
personali,
regardless of
abbiamo bisogno
political
di
views and
toccare su
personal
questo pianeta
opinions,
le
we need
temperature
to
più
reach the
basse, sia
lowest and the
nelle
highest temperature
registrate
ever reached
nell'universo
in
che
the
conosciamo.
universe we know.
E queste due temperature, tra le più alte
The
che
highest and
conosciamo,
lowest temperatures
abbiamo
ever
trovato
found in the
nell'universo, e le più
universe must be
basse
about
devono
1 to
essere distante
1.5
circa
meters
1 metro, 1 metro
apart.
e mezzo.
Why am I
Perché
talking
vi
about
parlo di
nuclear
fusione
fusion?
nucleare? Primo, perché
First,
ci
because
servirà
we
nei
will need
prossimi
this concept
incontri.
in the next
Secondo, perché
meetings,
sono
and
convinto che ci
second, because I
permetterà
believe that
di
it
vedere
will allow
completamente
us to
diversamente quello che
see
abbiamo
what we
detto essere
said about the
spezzare.
division from a totally different
Infatti,
perspective.
fai vedere Jack quelle slide, quelle immagini. Che cosa succede? Quella della fusione.
The slide shows the process of nuclear fusion.
In una fusione nucleare, questi sono nuclei di
These are
deuterio,
deuterium
possiamo
nuclei,
utilizzare
but
diciamo
different
carburanti
fuels could also
diversi,
be
questo vado un
used.
po' veloce. Dei nuclei vengono trasformati, due nuclei vengono
These two lighter
trasformati più
nuclei are
leggeri,
transformed into a
vengono
heavier one.
trasformati in un nucleo
The
più
weight,
pesante.
namely the mass of the resulting nucleus, is less than the
La
sum of the
massa
masses of the
del
two
nucleo più
nuclei
pesante è
involved.
minore
That
della somma
is,
delle
two
masse dei
nuclei
nuclei più
fusing
piccoli.
together form a larger nucleus,
Cioè,
which,
due
however,
nuclei
is slightly
fondendosi danno un
smaller
nucleo più
than the
grande,
sum of the two
che però è
nuclei,
più piccolo
because the
dell'altro,
lost mass
perché
has been
parte di quella
converted into
materia
energy,
trasformata
conforming to
dove
the
E
mass
è
energy
uguale
formula
in
E
energia.
equals to
Che energia
mc
della fusione
squared.
nucleare?
This is the energy released by
Qualche
nuclear
fisico
fusion.
storcerà il naso,
Some physicists will
ma è
turn up
come
their
due persone che
noses,
si
but it
fondono
is as if two
profondamente, che è
people
amore,
who fuse
non
together
asservire l'amore
profoundly,
verso la
which
vita.
is love, give
I
energy and life to
mystici
the universe.
cristiani,
And when the
buddisti,
Christian or
tutte le
Buddhist
tradizioni mistici
mystics,
veri
or
e
from
religioni
all other
che non parlano di
traditions,
sistemare la
I'm talking
personalità
here
con la
about the
spiritualità,
true mystics,
ma quelli che vogliono
beware, not
riscoprire
about those who seek
l'essere
to
oltre la
settle the
personalità e i
personality through
pensieri. Quando
spirituality, but
parlano
of
di
those who
matrimoni
seek the
mistici,
being beyond the
ad esempio San
personality
Giovanni
and
della Croce, un
thoughts.
mistico
True
meraviglioso
mystics, such
cristianesimo
as St.
famoso,
John of the
parla
Cross, a wonderful
della
but little
fusione
known
con Dio.
Christian mystic,
È
when they
come se la
speak of
fusione
mystical
con qualcosa
marriage,
che
they
è
mean the
oltre
fusion with God,
cedesse
describing
spontaneamente
it as
amore
if
e luce
fusing with
a tutti
something
quelli
that
che
is
sono nel
beyond
mondo.
spontaneously
Quando
would
una
yield
persona che si è
love and
aperta alla
light to all
personalità
beings. And when a person starts to go beyond the personality and she dissolves into the sea of the beyond like a salt doll, it is as if this very fusion, which some Christian mystics call mystical marriage, would shower energy and love to the whole universe. Keeping in mind what the mystics say, and being myself a physicist, and is yet still partly known because very little is known about the effects of nuclear fusion, I cannot fail to see something related to this, which in the future I have the feeling will arrive abundantly on the planet, because it will be a reflection of our consciousness which will no longer be divided. Instead of breaking the magnet and strengthening duality, it's about unification, about unity, about being as one. This is what stems out from enlightened masters, who have sensed, even if vaguely, who we really are. Humans who have begun to discover the light of the beyond, perceiving it in the world unwillingly. So when two particles merge, they give out considerable energy. How does this fusion happen? Think about it for a moment. Do you remember the physics you learned in middle school? Nuclei are positive. They have protons and neutrons. Then the protons and neutrons are in turn made of something else. But basically speaking, how do I make two nuclei merge, bring them closer, and join them if they are both positive? At school they taught me that two positives repel each other. Are you with me? Well, you need a force greater than the electrical repulsion, Coulomb force. So far this force is considered to be thermal agitation, and it's for this reason that very high temperatures are needed. Try to imagine, just so I explain it in simple words, and I apologize if there is a physicist turning up his nose, some billiard balls loaded on a pool table. Imagine that these billiard balls are all positive, and when other billiard balls come close, due to an electric thrust, these deflect their trajectory without touching the incoming balls. Unless in some cases the billiard balls are going so fast to the point that not even the electric repulsion force can avoid their collision. Are you there? Where does all the billiard ball's speed come from? It's heat. As we understand it now, it's thermal agitation for now, because other technologies may emerge that will truly transform the world. That thermal agitation requires a plasma at very high temperatures. Are you with me? These technologies were not possible a few years back, and even today, these are just approaching the question. Although we are not yet there, it's more like a forming thought. The first fusion reactions gave a return of less than 1. Do you know what that means? That if I put in 100 of energy, the first nuclear fusion gives me back 50 of energy. Therefore, I'm dispersing energy. But going forward, the nuclear fusion starts to give back a higher yield, meaning if I put in 100 of energy, I want to leave out the unit of measurement for now, so I put 100 of energy and it might give me back 1,000, maybe 500. So now something new is triggered, which might not have radioactive waste or very little radioactive waste that lasts a few months, not years, tens of years, hundreds of years, and where instead the surplus of energy is released. And I have to repeat this because I like to repeat it. What is it due to? To something that from 2 becomes 1. Okay? Is it possible that while physics discovers this, engineering learns to apply it, because we still don't know how to do this, so it's up to us to discover on another level? Meaning to find it in our love for a woman or for a man, or for a horse, a wolf, one's work, or even taking it to a higher level. I will use more of a Christian terminology to find it in the love for God, in the mystical fusion, as so many mystics would call it, who were so dear to Father Bannister. A kind of love that he transmitted to me when I was a boy. Is it possible that in this fusion the person who's giving energy, love, light to everything and everyone vanishes? It would be like a form of mystical nuclear fusion that, instead of merging the nuclei, merges the consciousness. It would be the opposite of division. And instead of reinforcing the magnet, which is divided into north and south poles, they merge and many become one. And in that fusion, energy and love is given to the world. Question: is that fusion a natural phenomenon? Nuclear fusion is one of the most natural things, because the sun and the stars shine thanks to nuclear fusion. Okay, not nuclear fission, which is the first we have been able to perform because technologically easier, and which instead breaks the nuclei, divides, and funnily enough generates enormous radioactivity, as if nature itself is telling us, don't go in this way, or you will make a huge mess in the world. Do not go this way by splitting, because if you split the nucleus, you indeed get energy, although you are creating radiation, and terrible pollution. Try instead to join the nuclei together, and at the level of consciousness, it is telling us that in this world we should also follow this direction. I am going to show this equation, which is perhaps the most famous equation ever. Everybody knows it. I do a little digression before we sit, if you wish, in meditation together. Perhaps it will be used again in the next meetings when we discuss the topic of physics and consciousness. Indeed, I think it's time to go through it with some common sense and intelligence. I spend a couple of words on this equation, although we will go back to it more carefully later on. It starts with m as a mass, which is not weight. Sometimes we get confused about this concept. If we buy 2 kilos of apples, we do not grab that we are not buying a quantity of apples, but the force by which the earth attracts those apples towards its center. That is, weight is a force. When I say that apples weigh 2 kilos, I'm just saying that I have in my bag the amount of apples that the earth attracts with that force. If I go to the moon, 2 kilos of apples become perhaps 0.8 kilos, 1.2 kilos. Did someone eat the apples? No, it's just because the moon attracts the same apples with less force. So we mistake mass for weight. If I go to the moon with the same apples, their mass is the same, while the weight is not. Are you with me? We could say roughly that mass is the amount of matter in the apples, which does not depend on where you are. On the contrary, weight is a force that depends on where you are. In outer space, apples would have no weight from 2 kilos straight to 0, while mass always remains the same. We call weight what is actually the unit of measure of a mass, kilos. So we make a hell of a mess. That is why we have difficulties grasping these concepts. It was Newton who first realized that mass is the resistance that a body offers to a change in velocity, either decelerating or accelerating it. We call it acceleration, which is the derivative of speed. I know you're thinking, how did I get here? Let me give an example. It is intuitive. If you have a shopping cart going downhill, and you have to slow it down, that is, you have to decrease its speed, well, you can do it much easier than slowing down a car going downhill in neutral, because their masses are different. Right? There is a big difference between pushing a shopping cart or a truck in neutral. Newton was the first to realize, or maybe Galileo, but it's not important. Newton was one of the first, together with Galileo, to realize that the same force offers different accelerations based on the mass. The bigger a body is, the less a force accelerates it. Accelerate or decelerate, of course. Therefore, mass is a weird thing that doesn't change on the moon or in space, but is always the same. Albert Einstein was the first to realize that mass and energy are two different sides of the same coin. This intuition astonished the scientific world and those who today truly grasp what this equation means. In earlier physics, mass and energy were two separate things. Albert Einstein led us to understand that energy and mass are two different ways of looking at the same thing. As if the chair on which we sit, or the body in which we dwell, were a sort of frozen energy. And what is one of the main features of energy?
È che non può essere né creata né distrutta.
It can neither be created nor destroyed, but only transformed. For example, kinetic energy, which you may remember from middle school, if I throw a body with a certain mass at a certain speed, the formula would be 1/2 times mv squared. That is, the faster an object is, the more kinetic energy it has. If you are in a gravitational field, this book, just because it's positioned at this height, has potential energy which is related to its distance from the center of the earth. If I drop this book, it's Krishnamurti, so I would never ever drop it. But if I dropped this book, the potential energy of the book would turn into kinetic energy. If I burned the book, the chemical energy contained in the pages would turn into heat. This is clear. However, Einstein was the first to say that a body is energy itself by the very fact of existing, regardless of whether it has energy inside, such as a battery, or whether I set it in motion, or whether it is stationary in a gravitational field or not. Mass itself is energy. The equivalence is with c squared. Do you know why c is used as a notation of the velocity of light? It comes from the Latin word celere, as if the Latins realized that it was the highest possible speed and the main reference to the whole universe. C is a huge number, therefore just 1 gram of mass, if we actually knew how to turn it into energy. I remember the first time a professor taught this concept at the university. I was amazed even though I had heard about it before.
Un grammo di materia, attenzione, qualsiasi materia.
A gram of matter, any matter, even your waste, your pee, or your poop, we keep a 10-watt light bulb on for about 300,000 years. You see, while physics has got there, technology, let's say engineering, hasn't got there yet, and we still don't know how to transform any matter. Instead of waste sorting, cardboard, plastic, cans, all that stuff that's a bit boring, think that in the future all rubbish could be collected and transformed into energy. Because a small amount of mass, whatever type of mass, even an old tin of chickpeas that you throw away, instead of being sorted, would all be transformed into energy thanks to nuclear fusion. We wouldn't have the problem of separate waste sorting or the problem of where to put our undifferentiated rubbish. And above all, we wouldn't have the problem of energy, of who provides us, Russia or others. So nuclear fusion becomes a mighty thing because not only does it make us independent from others' energy, but if we were able to transform any mass into energy, it also removes the problem of rubbish. You understand the magnitude behind it and why so many studies are on these things. By the way, nuclear fusion would involve less waste, and in the cases that require the highest temperatures of all, even very low or close to zero waste. Okay? So it's a very interesting thing. So let's come back to this fact. 1 gram of matter will keep a 10-watt light bulb on for about 300,000 years, which means that if you put a red light bulb in your grandfather's graveyard, a 1-watt bulb, he will have light for a long time. And a gram of matter is very light. Maybe you have a car key in your pocket. It weighs a lot more than a gram. Here, to get an idea of how important this is, it will be enough to remember that Einstein said a beautiful thing when he discovered it. Einstein was not good at mathematics, and he got help from other great mathematicians who were better than him, and in the end he said, I still didn't have the certainty that everything was right, but since all these endless, very long, complex calculations came up with such a simple result, that is, energy is equal to m times c squared, I knew that that simplicity must be right, because simplicity is always a sign that something true has been found. Please switch off the light and watch. "1905 was a miraculous year for Einstein and for physics. He had an extraordinary burst of creativity.
Tesla, puoi spegnere? Dario, potete spegnere luce anche di lato? Si può?
He began with the publication of his writings on how to determine the real size of atoms. 2 months later, his writing on the nature of light was published, which earned him the Nobel Prize. The third writing, only a month later, was about the motion of molecules subject to heat and a debate on the existence or non-existence of atoms. The fourth writing was published in the same year. In this letter, Einstein presented his theory of light, time and space, the theory of special relativity, which changed our worldview. In Einstein's new world, the only real constant was neither time nor space, but light. Einstein's miraculous year was not over yet. In one of his last writings in 1905, he theorized an even more profound unity. As he had calculated all the implications of his new theory, he noticed another strange connection, this time between energy, mass, and light. Einstein realized that light speed is the universe's speed limit. Nothing can travel faster. Imagine we have a loaded train traveling at light speed, and we fuel it with more and more energy. Since it cannot ride faster now, where does all this energy end up? It must go somewhere. Amazingly, it goes to the mass of the object. From our viewpoint, the train is actually heavier as energy becomes mass. It is an incredible idea. Even Einstein was astonished. Listen, I think I found a connection between energy and mass. If I am not wrong, they are not absolute at all. They are not different. And one can be converted into the other. Energy can turn to mass and mass can turn to energy. Energy is equal to mass times light speed squared. Do you want me to check your calculations? In 1905, Einstein published his fifth writing. In 3 pages, he simply asserted that energy and mass were connected to each other by the square of light speed. E equals mc squared. That qualified employee composed an entirely new melody, by way of 4 well-known notes in the scale of nature, the culmination of his 10-year journey into light. For thousands of years, we had thought that on one side there was a world of objects and matter, and on the other side there was a separate world of motion, force, and energy. Einstein says no, they are not separate. Energy can turn to mass, and crucially, mass can turn to energy. There is a deep connection between energy, mass, and light. E equals mc squared.
Per favore, riaccendete le luci.
Let's go back to the fusion slide.
Della fusione. Jack, quella lì. No,
Let's imagine 2 nuclei, the red one and the blue one, on the left. Imagine that these 2 nuclei weigh 4. Let's forget the unit of measurement. 4 plus 4 makes 8, right? And therefore the nucleus that comes from the fusion of the 2 small nuclei should weigh 8. Actually, it is found that it weighs 5. 4 plus 4 equals 8, but it weighs 5. Those 3, kilos, milligrams, are very small units. Where did those 3 go? They became energy, according to E equals mc squared. So, a tiny amount of mass, multiplied by the speed of light squared, gives a considerable amount of energy. The fusion of 2 light nuclei gives a heavier nucleus, which is not the sum of the 2, because a part is turned into energy. Please bring it back to you again. Think when you truly find a love that is more than a feeling, more than an emotion, more than a physical attraction, against which we have nothing anyway. When there is even a small fusion with a person, with an animal, with whatever for you is love, is it possible that, without even wanting it, visualizing it or repeating it, you are simply giving an enormous amount of energy to everyone else, to the world, to the universe? And is it possible that this is slowly freeing us from the conditioning of the big magnet, which instead is based on the duality of good, bad, beautiful, ugly, aware, unaware, those who follow a high spiritual teaching like mine from others? So, is it possible that the bearers of something higher in a new consciousness are those who, even in a small way, have experienced this fusion? Ramana Maharshi calls it the self, doesn't he? Some Christian mystics call it God, but they have experienced it. They do not believe it, and are not even talking about it to others. Is it possible that the fusion between 2 nuclei on a different level can be seen as the fusion of our consciousness with something beyond us?
Sia della fusione della nostra coscienza con qualcosa che è oltre noi.
I leave this question pending and remind you that we will also pick up from here in the next few meetings and move on to physics topics. Please be patient. I ask you to get up and get together with someone, possibly someone you do not know.